Hey everybody, this is Ryan from Viva Local Vegas, and today I want to answer some questions. It seems every time I run a tour, I get asked some form of the question, what is it like to live in Las Vegas? Maybe they ask questions about the schools, maybe they ask questions about the property values, maybe they just ask questions about daily life. But it seems like every time I run a tour, I get asked at least one question about daily life here in Las Vegas. So with this video, I just want to clear up some misconceptions and I want to speak a little bit about what it's like to live in Las Vegas. And more specifically, what you should consider if ever you want to strongly consider moving out here. Now, I need to say this right away. I'm probably going to come off as very pessimistic in this video, but I absolutely love living in Las Vegas. My choice to leave the Midwest and move here is probably the best decision I've made in my entire adult life, with the exception of maybe marrying my wife, but that's a different story. That being said, with this video, I want to highlight some things that you do need to stop and strongly consider before you choose to move out here. Because benefit of hindsight, I wish I would have thought of some of these a bit more before I made that choice. Anyway, let's get started. I don't think anyone is going to deny that the cost of living is high here in Las Vegas. However, it was kind of funny. In researching for this topic, I found a lot of different sources saying a lot of different specifics about the cost of living. And it seems to depend more on what you're comparing it to than anything. For example, it is substantially cheaper than living in a place like New York City. But at the same time, it is substantially more expensive to live in Las Vegas than to live in a place like, for example, Chicago. So I think it really depends on where you're coming from on this one. But at the same time, rent and housing in particular has been steadily increasing in price, I would say at least since the housing market crisis in 2008, if not sooner. I'll give you guys an example here. It seems like everybody has a slightly different experience in this department, but here is mine, just to give you guys a perspective. So when I left Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I was paying $600 a month for rent at a modest one-bedroom apartment. It was 750 square feet, to give you an idea. When I moved to Las Vegas, my first apartment was about 850 square feet, so a little bit bigger, but not substantially so. However, the rent more than doubled. I was going from $600 a month up to $1,265 a month for an apartment that was comparable in not only size, but also very similar in layout and setup and construction. Again, depending on where you're coming from, that may or may not be the case, but the cost of housing in particular has skyrocketed, and it's only going to be going up in the years to follow. Now, as with any place you go, you can find cheaper places to live. But especially in a community like Vegas, that means making some pretty major sacrifices. And that leads me to my next point. Now, of course, this is 2024. Organized crime no longer controls this town the way they did in, for example, the 1950s. But crime is still a major concern in literally every part of the city. Even the safer neighborhoods are not immune to it, unfortunately. This map is courtesy of crimegrade.org, and I will leave a link in the description if you want to look at it a little bit closer. But this does a good job of putting into perspective just how intense the crime problem is here in Las Vegas. Something to consider is that this is not based on the national crime average. This is actually based on the average for Las Vegas. So places that are green still have more crime than the national average. It's just lower in terms of frequency and severity than other parts of the city. So the green is a bit of a misnomer. I live way up in the Northwest and Centennial Hills, and where I live specifically, there's been a severe upkick in car-related incidents since the new year. As a matter of fact, as of April 1st of this year, my apartment community has doubled the amount of security patrols within the community purely to try to mitigate this because it is becoming a major problem here. And going back to my previous point about cost of living, the places where the rent is cheapest is, for the most part, where the crime is highest. So if you're willing to deal with that, then you could absolutely find places for $600 or $700 a month. But then you have to be willing to be prepared to deal with crime, be that installing a home security system, arming yourself, taking necessary precautions, etc., etc. To be fair, the potential risks associated with crime can be mitigated by being careful, being alert, etc., etc., but it is something to consider. On average, a crime occurs every 3 minutes in Las Vegas. And that is, of course, only the crimes that are ever reported. It's fair to assume that they happen quite a bit more often than that. Also, something else to consider, especially if you have children, is that Las Vegas is one of the largest hotspots in the entire world for child sex trafficking. So, bringing children here for any amount of time is a major risk, and you constantly have to be alert and be mindful about not only where your kids are going, but who they are interacting with. In a nutshell, the less that's said about Clark County School District, the main public school district out here, the better. It's kind of funny, actually. The last decade or so, there has been an explosion in new private and charter schools being opened, probably just to make up for the sheer deficits of CCSD. I can't speak for every news outlet, I can't speak for every story that's ever published, but the vast majority of what I see in terms of national headlines pertaining to CCSD is based in fact on some level. Yes, there is gang activity within some of these schools. Yes, there are schools where police officers patrol in full riot gear and packing heat. Yes, there is major corruption on practically every level. Yes, there are fights on a near daily basis. Yes, there are stabbings all the time. These things unfortunately happen literally all the time. And it's a tragic side effect of living in a community like this, but that is a major thing that you need to consider if you choose to live here, is where your kid's going to go to school. Now, as I already mentioned, there has been a substantial upkick in private and charter schools, and some of them are very solid. So if you take your time and you're maybe willing to spend a couple extra bucks, you can get your kids into a really solid school. But that is a major thing that you do need to consider before committing to laying down roots here. Now, of course, those are not the only things you need to consider moving to a place like Las Vegas, but they are three major things that I wish I would have thought about more with the benefit of hindsight. I moved here 2 years ago now, and especially now that I have children on the way, the school component is something that I wish I would have thought more about. But anyway, there are a lot of other things to consider. For example, how much traffic can you handle? Las Vegas is not the worst city in the world for traffic, but after having lived here for a while, I firmly believe that the angriest drivers in the world are here in Vegas. Another thing to consider are just those little things. The little things about where you live now that you probably won't see in Vegas. Vegas is very different from pretty much anywhere else you could live in the United States. There's really nowhere else in the world really like Vegas. So there are little things that you probably take for granted now that you are going to miss. For example, from my own experience, one thing that I miss on a near daily basis is the open road. Growing up in the Midwest, it was one small town, you drive 20 minutes, and you're in another small town, so there was a lot of open road. Here in Vegas, there's literally none of that. And it's to the point now where anytime I leave Las Vegas, for example, a few weeks ago I spent the weekend in Laughlin, just the sheer act of driving on an open road felt like a breath of fresh air. Another thing I find myself missing are seeing the stars. With so much light pollution in a city like this, there's literally nowhere in the valley where you can see any amount of stars. So anytime I leave the valley, I always make a point to stop and do some stargazing, because it's one of those little things I took for granted growing up in the Midwest that now I literally never see. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you for watching, and if you got this far, feel free to like, follow, and subscribe.